Okay, can you all hear me? Cool. Um, so welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today. I'm Dani Passos, Developer Relations at Hashnode. It's great to have all of you together with us for this workshop. We are here to have a workshop that will help you guys build your projects using AWS Amplify. And AWS Amplify is your co-pilot in the world of web development, allows you guys to transition smoothly from an idea to a fully built application, and provides all the tools and services that you guys will need to easily build, deploy, and host full stack applications. So for this hackathon, we also have $12,000 in prizes distributed in cash and also AWS credits together with awesome swag. And whether you are a seasoned developer or first timer, there's something for everyone. So I'll bring Eric up to get the workshop session started. Hey,
Hi,
Eric,
Danny.
how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. You ready to get started?
Yep.
Cool.
All right. Let's talk about Amplify Studio. And I'll explain what that is as we go along. All right. So before I tell you what it is, I'll explain why you may be interested in it. So let's start off with an experiment here. Imagine that you need to create a rental application. Let's say you're creating like an Airbnb clone, or you're just kind of trying to create a modern web app as a front-end developer. And we're going to talk about some things you may need. So first, authentication. So we need to have some way to protect our application so that way only certain users can create profiles that they can upload their listings for their cabins. We also probably have some administrators that need to be able to go in and change, delete listings, add listings for this app. Well, obviously, we have data. So we are going to have properties that we're going to be displaying and selling on this application. So we need to have a way to store that data. So probably we're looking at a database, maybe like a relational database or maybe a non-relational database. You probably want to think about our design too. Like, how do we make it engaging to the user? How do we make it so that it is accessible for everyone, not just for developers or for certain people, but anybody that can log into the website, they can use it. They can use it with screen readers. They can, if you're colorblind, you don't have any issues either. And it just kind of looks nice. And of course, we have a lot of files that we'll probably be uploading and using. For example, pictures. We want to make sure those are available on the website, and we want to have a way for users to maybe upload their own houses or their own listings on there and be able to have that available. And of course, an important consideration is hosting. So we want to make sure that you can host your website, that it supports the latest technologies like Next.js with server-side rendering or static site generation. And we want to obviously have it connected to a domain name and have it be reliable and be able to handle all the traffic that we need. So what stack do we choose for this? Now, obviously, we're on this level up with AWS Amplify call today, so it's a little obvious, but let's just take a look at, there's a lot of different choices out there. I don't know. I came back from a long time ago. I did the LAMP stack. If you remember that, Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. There's the Epic stack, T3, Mern, Maven. But what I really want to talk to you about today is this one in the corner. And I'm calling this the Amplify stack, the AWS Amplify stack. And I want to be clear here. This is just AWS services that you can use in your application. But what's nice about with Amplify, it's going to give you the tools that you need for as a front-end developer and mobile developer to use those services much more easily than you probably done in the past if you've used AWS and you've done that route. So going back to the example that we had before, we have auth with Cognito. Data, we can use our managed GraphQL service AppSync, which I'll be talking about a little bit more here in this presentation. I think Michael Leando will be talking about this in much more detail as well soon. Design, we're going to look at Amplify UI, which is our UI components library that we have. It's a fully functional, accessible library that you can use to create your full stack applications. File storage, S3 is the leader in file storage on the net, and we're going to use S3 with our application. And then hosting, we'll use Amplify hosting. So who am I real quickly? I'm a developer. I'm also a YouTuber, and I'm a developer advocate at AWS Amplify. And feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on Twitter at EricCH, after this presentation. Today, though, we are going to focus mostly on Amplify Studio. There is a few other things. Amplify Studio has a bunch of different options. I'll show you kind of what that is. It's a visual editor for your backend. So you can provision everything that I showed you before, that S3, your authentication. You can even connect it up to our UI components library. And our AppSync service, and it's all done in this visual editor. And that's what I'm going to show you today. I'm going to do a quick demo of how that works. So today, I'm going to create this cabins application. So you can see here, it has a handful of pictures. We have the number of bedrooms, the number of nights, and you can see here in the top right-hand corner, there's an admin and sign out. So this is protected by our Cognito service. So authenticated users can log in and add or remove add listings or remove listings. So let's start. I'm going to assume that you have created a Next 13 app. And the first thing you would want to do is install the Amplify CLI. This is a command line tool that you use that connects to your AWS account. If you haven't already, obviously you can get a free AWS account. And what we're going to do, and by the way, if you are using Next 13 in your app, I would recommend turning the app router off. It just makes it a little bit easier, though. I did do a video today on using it with the app router. So if you go to eric.video, the video I just posted today is a Next 13 app using Amplify with the app router, if that's something you're really interested in. But it's a little bit more complicated. And then you need to configure the CLI. So you run this Amplify configure, and this will connect up to your AWS account that you have already. And then we're going to install some libraries. I'm going to do npm i AWS Amplify UI, React, and AWS Amplify. And these are kind of all the libraries you need to get started in your application. Now, next, well, first I want to just mention, we are doing some things in the command line, but a lot of the stuff we're going to show you in this demo will be outside the command line. This will be the visual Amplify Studio presentation part. So we're going to go into Amplify Studio. I'm going to do a quick demo of this. This is pre-recorded, just to let you know. And we're going to set up this application that you saw, but I really want you guys to think about what other things you can add to the application. I'll give you a link at the end of this presentation of where you can find this full application. So you're gonna have some homework if you like to complete it, but I'll show you the beginning of it, how to get started. All right, so here is the AWS Management Console. So first thing I would do is go ahead and sign into the console, and you'll just make sure you have your account. And then you'll need to search for AWS Amplify. And this is just the first option here. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll just click the Get Started button here. And then you can put in the app name that you want to create. And I'll just call this Studio App. I'll click Confirm Deployment, and this will create all the infrastructure and everything we need in the back end to create a Studio App. And we'll go ahead and click Launch Studio. Now, this is basically Studio. This is what you can use to create your full stack applications and how we're going to create our app today. On the left-hand side, you can see we have some options for content, user management, file browser, but we can also set up our data, which I'll show you in a moment, our authentication, storage, things like that. So let's take a look how we would set up Cognito, user pools, essentially a way to create Cognito in our app, or authentication in our app. So we're going to click on authentication on the left-hand side. And I'm going to zoom in here real quickly. But you can have different ways you can log a user in. It defaults by email, but I can add additional login mechanisms for like Facebook, Google, Amazon. So if you want to create a federated login, you can do it right through this console here. You can also add additional attributes. So let's say you want to also collect when someone signs up, like their email or birth date. You can choose there. You can change your password protection settings. So like have require a certain amount of characters. And then you can change the verification mechanism. We're going to leave it all defaults and click to confirm deployment. And right here, what it's doing is it's provisioning and doing everything in the background for us. That's a little sped up. So now I'm going to copy the command it gives us. I'm going to go back into the application. This is the Next 13 app. And I'm going to paste it in the console. And it's going to ask me to confirm it. And this will go ahead and pull down that infrastructure and our kind of CloudFormation scripts into our application. So that way we can make changes from there. And it's going to ask us some default questions about what type of app we have. We're just going to hit enter all the way through that. And that's going to pull it all together. And then I can run Amplify status. And this is a command, the CLI command. I can see, oh, I have auth. Now I want to quickly talk about the UI component library. So if you go to ui.docs.amplify.aws, this is what we're going to add in. This is the authenticator. But we also have lots of different components. So we have icons, views, loaders, autocompletes, buttons, checkboxes. So we're going to create our application using this UI component library because it's just a little easier. Now, if we go back into VS Code, we have this Amplify folder. This was created for us when we ran that Amplify pull command. And this is going to have everything we have here was created from that. So it has like our auth and everything else. Now, this application, I already created a few of these files beforehand because I just want to highlight some of the more important things. But you can notice here, I'm using all these, like this property card. This is what's going to surround each one of the cards that you see. You can see I'm using this flex, this heading, this rating. These are all from the UI components library. It has these style props that you see here, this align items. It just makes it really simple really straightforward to create your app. Now, here's the main entry point of my application. This is the app TSX file. And I need to do a little bit of configuration for Amplify. So I'm going to import in Amplify from AWS Amplify, import in the AWS exports file. Now, this file was created when we ran the Amplify pull. And then we'll do a little bit of configuration here. So this is the first thing you usually do when you create a new application and after you get it up and running here. And then I'm going to surround this whole application by this authentication.provider. This is just make it so that if we have different routes, we can access the auth correctly here. Now we're going to go into our login route. Like I created this beforehand. And what I want to do here is have a way for the authenticator to show up correctly and for users to be able to use it. So first, I'm going to import in useRouter for next navigation. And I'm import in use effect, and then I import in this use authenticator and the authenticator from AWS Amplify UI React, that library we installed earlier. And then we're going to use this kind of syntax that looks a little funny. It's called use authenticator. It's a way that we can access the route. So I can check to see if the route is authenticated. I don't want users to see a login page. I want them to go directly into the app. So it'll push them to the admin. And then those three lines there, the authenticator, sign out authenticator, that's all you need to do to add in the authentication. So now you can see this added this whole page here with just a few lines of boilerplate. And now I can put in this my email address, kind of old email address. I'll click create account. And it's going to ask me for a confirmation code that I'm going to have in my other screen. And I'm going to put that in. And I'm going to click confirm. And great. So now I have essentially created the first part. I have a way I have like a protected route. Only admin users can go in here for now. So let me show you the manage GraphQL part of it. So we're going back into Studio. I can click on this data tab. And now this is where I can create our data models for our manage GraphQL service. So I'm going to create one called house because we have house data that we want to save into our database. We can do ID, name. We're going to add in thumbnail. Thumbnail alt, beds, rating. So these are all things that we probably would want to have, data that we want to collect. We can also kind of do some nice things here. We can make it so only certain users can add this model. So in this case, I'm saying authenticated users can read, who have the API key. So basically public users can read, but only authenticated users can add. Only certain authenticated users can add new houses. Then I go ahead and click publish, and it goes ahead and publishes it. And what I can do now is I have that same pull command I had before, but I can go back to content. Now this is our data manager. And what's really nice here, I just created that model. I can put a bunch of dummy data in here. And I also can see data that other people have entered in. So this is great for non-technical people. It's basically a whole content management system built into Studio. And I can edit my houses. I put my rates in. This is exactly the model I created earlier. So I'm going to change the rating because usually it's out of 5. So I'm just going to change it and put the correct amount of ratings in there. And so we're going to see if we can get this data pulled into our app. That's our next step here. So I'm going to go back into my application. Anytime I make changes using Amplify Studio, I have to run this Amplify pull command. So this will pull the data back in. And then I'm going to go into my index file here. So this is for the properties, basically the main entry point of the application. So I'm going to pull in this house, which is the source models. This was automatically generated for us. All this whole models folder was. I'm going to pull in that property card I showed you earlier. I'm going to use some basic use state, so some basic React to have some state. And then I'm going to use this try catch with this data store. So I'm going to do a data store query for the house. This is a way we can query. There's also a way to do it, an API GraphQL way of doing this, but we'll use data store for right now. And so essentially we're going to query the backend to grab all the data we want. And then we're going to save it into our houses. And then we're going to use this collection component, which is essentially a way, it's a primitive that you can grab from the UI React library that helps you iterate over multiple different pieces. And we can add in a bunch of styling to it. And we can see here, we're going to use this collection component. It's going to go into this property card. And then in our app, we do need a theme provider. So you can have a part of using the UI components library, you can set a whole theme. So I want to show you that real quickly. So I have a theme here. I'll surround the whole application by the theme provider. And then for the theme provider, I'm going to pass in theme, which is an object. And by the way, don't try to memorize all this. We have this all in our documentation notes, but this kind of gives you an idea of all the different things you can do with our UI components library with Studio. Here's a big file I created beforehand with all the different styling. Okay, so this is what we have so far. So we have, this is back to our login page. We have all that nonsense data that we generated using our CMS. And we have the ratings showing up, but we don't have the pictures and things like that yet. So that's where we're going to stop now for the sake of time. But I want you to think about how you would take this application and add in pictures, how you would have someone add information in or delete information. I think this is a good start. So imagine what you can build with your next project. And I will leave you with this last screenshot. This QR code right here has the full application. So this might be a good place to go to see it completely built. But I'd encourage you to try to take this information, maybe even take this source and see if you can add to it, add some delete features, see if you can get the pictures running. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you for the presentation. And next up, I'm bringing Michael. Hey, Michael.
Hey, Danny, how are you?
I'm doing great. What about you?
I'm doing well. Happy to be here, in fact.
Nice. Do you have a presentation to pull up?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share my window here. We can go ahead and get started.
Cool. Okay. All right, go ahead.
Perfect. Hey, everybody. My name is Michael Yendo. I go by Focus Otter pretty much everywhere online. And I'm a senior developer advocate over here at AWS. I specifically work on a team called AppSync. We're a managed GraphQL team and service at AWS, and that's what I'm going to be speaking on today. So we're in a hackathon mindset, right? And the thing about hackathons is that you really want to, if you've never done one before, really prioritize speed and delivery. And that's what Eric was talking about when it came to the Amplify CLI. By running a few commands, you can get your application set up really, really fast. But the other aspect of hackathons is that me specifically, I like to make money. And I like using hackathons as a way to get my ideas out there into the world. Now, even though I work at AWS, I do quite a building on the side. And in particular, I'm really fond of the micro SaaS community. So you see the description here. A micro SaaS is really a way to take a niche idea and try to generate anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000 monthly recurrent revenue from it. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a lot of money to me. And if I could do that in the span of a hackathon, I think I'm off to a great start. Now, I'm making no guarantees here, but this is certainly within the realm of what you can get started with. And I'm going to show a different approach to how we can build this out. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with what a micro SaaS is, I guarantee that you've seen it 100 times, right? This is your typical, hey, sign up for monthly billing / yearly billing. And then we oftentimes have these two tiers here, right? We have a basic tier, a pro plan, and maybe even an enterprise plan, which is always that, contact us for additional support, additional features, etc. This is definitely within the realm of possibilities of what you can build on AWS and what you can build for this hackathon. But a lot of things are taken into consideration, and Eric touched on a few of these, right? Using Amplify, you have to, or building out any application really, you have to factor in things like, how am I going to have authentication set up? Not just authentication, but what if my users forget their passwords? And how I'm going to scale this from when I have 10 users to 100 to 1,000? What does my application look like? And at the core of all of this, and what I'm going to be speaking on in just a moment, is going to be the API section. But keep in mind that as we're discussing Amplify, Amplify solves all of these problems. And oftentimes, these are problems that you may not realize up front. And finding the solution is often inserting your credit card with a different third-party provider. But here with AWS, you can sort of take care of all of this with just us. Now, the one caveat to this is going to be payment acceptance and onboarding. I like to use things that are just tried and true and work. That's why I work at AWS. But then Stripe is also a fantastic choice when it comes to having your users taking payments. And again, the project that I'm going to be showcasing today is how you can build out this SaaS app where you will be taking live payments. So what does this look like? All right, so let's be upfront. There's a lot that goes down with making a full-blown SaaS application. But fortunately, and Eric actually touched on half of these services, it's not going to be that difficult. There's just pieces that you put together. Now, you would do this whether you're working with an Amplify stack or not. It's just a matter of what does it look like when you put
Hey,
those
Michael,
pieces together. Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you, but I think we are stuck in the first slide over here.
Oh, no. Let me get out of presentation mode. Is it switching now?
Yes, I think you need to hit play over there in the keynotes.
I hit play, and I think that's what caused it to freeze.
To lag and to stop.
Yeah. How about I just stick with a full screen? Does that work?
Yes. Okay, that works perfectly.
Perfect,
Thank
perfect.
you.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
So going through, just to kind of recap a little bit, right? We were talking about a micro SaaS application, and we're really trying to gear towards having each and every one of you profit actual dollars and funds here within that $5,000 to $10,000 range. So as I mentioned, you've seen this a couple of times before when it came to basic and pro plan billing. And this is what we're going to be building out with this hackathon. And I have a couple starter projects to help you out here. So factoring in all of the considerations that have to go in place, I mean, you also have things like, where is this thing going to be hosted? I also need a way to make my front end look nice, and where I'm going to be storing my data. All of these play into your delivery of the application, but at the same time, you only have a certain amount of time to build this out. So you want to do so in a quickly deliverable way. So this is really where we noticed that my slides were getting a little messed up there, but this is the stack that we have set up. And Eric actually touched on a lot of these services. You can see AppSync in the center. For a database, we have a couple other services. If you're not familiar with them, that's okay, because the whole point is that you're given a launch pad when you work with Amplify, so that you can focus on building your application. You can let us worry about all of the difficult opinions and trade-offs and setup configuration that you would oftentimes have to do by yourself. So I have the names here just so that you can sort of familiarize yourself with them. But you have things like authentication. We have a service called Cognito that handles that. When it comes to storing your files, we have a service called S3. Your API layer is the team that I'm on, which is AppSync. And if you're sort of imagining everything that Amplify does for you, specifically the Amplify CLI, it puts these pieces together just by typing in a few commands in your terminal. Now, I'm proposing a different approach, still using Amplify services, but it's going to be using called the CDK. Now, the really cool thing about this is that the AWS CDK uses TypeScript. So when it comes to creating a database table, you can see that we have the table name, how we want to build, certain partition keys, etc., right in here. And then through the use of TypeScript, we get IntelliSense. And all this is, again, given to you in a starter repo that creates all of these tables, Cognito, services, S3 buckets, etc. Now, for the payment aspect, I'm using Stripe. Stripe actually takes form in a couple different ways here. We have Stripe payments, and this is going to be handled with a pricing table. This is actually relatively new. I work with some of their developer advocates on their team to provide feedback on how this would work in a real world application. So using the pricing table from Stripe, we can use a React component to bring that into our application. And Eric also touched on how we can use Next.js to create these really nice looking pages through the use of our pre-built UI components. Stripe's pricing table is also very, very pleasant to the eyes. And if you haven't checked it out yet, I highly encourage it. But going back on some of the services that we're talking about here, we have Cognito. This is what it would take to create a Cognito user pool. And again, this is through the use of TypeScript. Over on the left-hand side, you see some of the features and customization options that we have. But then on the right side, you can see the actual TypeScript code that it would take to create this. And the cool thing is that once it's codified, it's in version control. You can tweak it to your like, you can redeploy it however you like, and it's there for you to sort of take in and reference, as opposed to clicking through the AWS console, which admittedly can be a little bit tricky. I'm just recapping some of the things that Eric already talked about, but how do you bring this into your application, right? We have Amplify here using our UI components, and then we have Cognito. And once our front end is aware of those backend services through the use of this AWS exports file, having it show up on a web page is really just, what are we looking at? 4 lines of code here. It's pretty straightforward. If you're worried about, hey, it's AWS, and then what about the pricing considerations? I wouldn't, because to actually accrue any costs on AWS, one, if you are starting a new AWS account, you're likely in a free tier. And if you're out of the free tier, we have very generous limits for how your application can be built. In the case of DynamoDB, we have 50 gigabytes of storage before you ever incur a charge. And if you're wondering, well, how do I set up my database in a real world application? Again, not using the Amplify CLI, but instead opting to use TypeScript in the form of the CDK. This is how you would do it. So 2 different approaches depending on your comfort level. If you're a front-end developer and AWS is new to you, I would 100% encourage you to use the AWS CLI in conjunction with what Eric was showing, which is Amplify Studio. If you are a backend developer and you're like, you know what, I'm really used to maybe not so much AWS, but deploying my resources with infrastructure as code, this is the stack that I'm proposing that you take advantage of. So here on this screen, we have AWS AppSync, and this is going to be near and dear to my heart, right? This is the team that I'm on. If you're used to GraphQL, then you already are familiar with the concept of a schema. And these are some of the options on the left-hand side of what we give you for free, right? This is really, really generous. I mean, 250,000 queries, 250,000 subscriptions, which is another benefit of using AppSync. But because it's all wrapped into this ecosystem of AWS, then you have your API being tied to your authentication service. So you can see on the right-hand side, we have this cool directive, this at AWS Cognito user pools. What that says is, hey, for anybody to list out recipes, they have to be a signed in user. Or for anyone to create a recipe, same thing. Now, the starter template that I have gives you all of this code. Okay, but I'm just showing you what it would take to create this on your own. You give it a name, you give it a path to your schema, and you tell AWS how you want your API to be authorized. In the case of our example, we're saying the authorization type is going to be with our user pool with Cognito. Now, for me, the hardest part about using any GraphQL provider is that sure, I can create my schema, sure, I can create my API, but I have to create that resolver, right? I have to tell my API, how are you going to get the data? And the really cool thing about writing these queries on your front end is that Amplify generates this for you. So we automatically give you this command through the at AWS Amplify CLI codegen, which will look at your schema and say, I'm going to write all of the queries, mutations, subscriptions for you so that you can use them in your application. And we give you the option of generating JavaScript code or TypeScript code. I think it's super, super cool. So I've been talking about it, but what does this thing look like once you deploy it? Again, you get a front end, you get a back end, you get a full stack SaaS application where you have this sort of beautiful looking front end built with Next.js, Tailwind, Amplify, and then you also have all of it scaled and powered by AWS. So it's a recipe application. Feel free to tweak the product to your liking, but recipe is what you get by default. And then all of the infrastructure is already handled in place for you. I think those of you that do take this on are going to find that it's going to be really enticing and show you the power of working with AWS and Next.js across a full stack application. Now, realistically, not everybody is there yet, right? So fortunately, and this is just a fun little coincidence, I host my blog on Hashnode. And for those of you that don't know, Hashnode is built on top of AWS. So if you go to my blog, blog.focusotter.cloud, which is a really cool use of their custom domain feature, shout out to Hashnode, you can check out my full course on how to get started with the CDK. Now, I would say in the course of a Hashnode, this is going to be for those that want to take on maybe additional learning. But I do have, from the perspective of a front-end developer, right, how to get started with AWS, how to get started with the CDK, and how do you build out these applications using all of these different services. I walk you hand in hand on how to do so. So you see my Twitter handle at the bottom. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions. I am everywhere at Focus Otter. So feel free to connect with me, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. And I will be more than happy to help you get started and have the most success on this hackathon. Thank you.
Thank you for the awesome presentation, Michael, and big shout out to your Hashnode blog. I will definitely be checking that out over there. And next up, we have Aaron Deep. You ready?
Hey, Danny. Yep, I'm ready.
Hello. All right.
All right, let's get started. Hey, everyone. So I will be going ahead with sharing of information that has pretty much been discussed by Eric and Michael in most of their presentations. So I don't want it to be a redundant information dump. But just quickly going through the resources that are there as a part of your hackathon. If you go to the registration page, there's a short video that I've put together where I go through a real estate app and how you consume each and every one of the resources as you build your real world use case app. But in a nutshell, there are few documentation portals that we have. The one that I'm looking at right now is the AWS Amplify's documentation site. And we segregate this based on the framework and the platform of your choice. So you could go in here, React is the most common framework that web developers like to use. So that would be the landing page. But if you do want to go ahead and build an iOS app or an Android app or a cross-platform app using Flutter, there are the different frameworks that you can switch through from here. If you did take a look at how Eric and Michael built their apps, one of them used CDK, the other one used AWS Amplify Studio, and the links to different sections within the doc actually points to the areas in which Amplify is built. So if you're building your backend, you could use Amplify CLI, or you can use Amplify Studio if you prefer a visual-based development environment. On the front-end side, you can actually go ahead and use Amplify libraries for these different frameworks. Typically, you would be on a JavaScript framework if you're building a web app. And you could go ahead and use multiple different categories of AWS Amplify. For example, if you are just building an authentication resource, this would be a great place for you to get started and see how you could consume the libraries to add authentication to your app. Now, the doc site is also built in with a nav bar at the top, which actually takes you to a specific Learn site where we have created courses that can help you get started with your app. And you could go ahead and build a membership website with Stripe as your payment gateway, or you could get started with a full stack app for front-end devs through here. There's also a UI library doc site where you have documentation about the UI components that is being used. As a part of your pre-built components, if you do want to use like UI components that are pre-built for React, and you don't have to spend time in theming your components or building them from scratch, this is an easy way for you to already go ahead and get started and get this into your application. And last but not the least, you also see that multiple sections of the doc site also have links to hosting, which is on the AWS corpus of our documentation site. So if you do want to host your web application, then this would be the place to get started with. Now, I have started with the documentation that exists for AWS Amplify, but in case you are new to AWS, then you can get started with AWS Cloud from the fundamental site that we have here, from visiting aws.amazon.com/getting started. You can take a look at the different videos about how you can use different segments of AWS. Typically, AWS Cloud is categorized into multiple different segments like compute, storage, databases, networking, data science, and machine learning, and everything AI. So you could take a look at multiple different categories, go ahead and take a look at some of the samples that has been built here, and then get started with an AWS account by signing in into the console here. And as Michael and Erica already touched upon, you can get started with a free AWS account. Most of the times you will not exceed the free tier. In the event that you do exceed your free tier, you'd still be within the considerable limits that is needed for you to build your app. And last but not the least, there's also the getting started guides that we have on AWS Corpus again, where you do have hands-on tutorials. So we call that as the GSRC, or the Getting Started Resource Center portal. And in here, we do have a Flutter mobile app example where you can get started with building a app for trip planning using Amplify Flutter. All right, those are the resources for everyone to get started. If you do have any questions or any issues that you run into, we do have a Discord channel that we use for answering questions. So feel free to reach us out on Discord as well, and we'll be more than happy to help you out. All right, now I'm going to stop sharing, and we'll be up for Q&A.
All right. Well, we do have a few questions over here. And the first one from Tech Processor is how Amplify is different from other stacks, like in terms of efficiency, performance, and ease of use.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I think we all have a little bit different ideas. I mean, I would say the breadth and depth of the Amplify stack is pretty amazing. And when I talk about Amplify stack, it's really the AWS stack. It's AWS services that you know and love, like S3, Lambda, Cognito, and more. So, and AppSync. So these are services that you know all together. And what Amplify brings that's a little different than probably some other stacks is that we have libraries for everything. We have libraries for Vue, React Native, Angular, Flutter, iOS, Android. So whatever you are in this whole ecosystem, there's probably a library that you can use that'll work with it. We also have connected components. So that makes it a little bit different. So connected components are a way that you can use with just a few lines of boilerplate code, add in a whole authenticator component to it, to your application, which allows you to like log in and sign up and sign out, and then also handles things like multi-factor authentication or federated login. And it's really composable and customizable if you need to as well. We have a geo component. So if you want to add maps to your application, we have account settings. So if you want to change your passwords, you can just add in a few lines of code and get that all for free. So we have these, and also we just came out with one called Liveness, which is great to detect like faces and if people are detect if it's a real user or not. So we're continuously like adding these new components, which I think differentiates us a lot. Plus, we have a lot of different ways you can be efficient with the Amplify stack. We have the CDK, which Michael just went over in depth, which is really powerful, especially if you're a TypeScript user and you want to build a solution quickly. You have you can CDK, but we also have Studio, and then we also have a command line interface. So really, I think the differentiator is you're using the AWS services that you know and like, which are very efficient, which do have extremely good performance, which are also have very generous free tiers. Most of them are on demand, so you're not having to pay. It's not like we're throwing up EC2 instances and you're paying per minute or per hour. No, these are you only pay when you use them. They have extremely flexible, generous free plans, which make it very cost. It's very low cost as well.
Nice. For a new person that has just started development, what would you guys say that is the best way to get started with AWS Amplify?
Yeah, I could take this one. So essentially, you would get into the AWS Amplify documentation. And if you're totally new to AWS platform, you can get started with our AWS documentation, which actually navigates you through setting up an account and working through different aspects of IAM and security controls, before which you can get into different categories of setting up your compute resources, whether it be an EC2 instance or whether you want to deploy an app through container-based system using ECS, EKS. There are multiple different services that cater to multiple different use cases. So if you want to get started with AWS Cloud, that would be a good place to get started with, specifically for this particular hackathon and how we cater to front-end developers and services. AWS Amplify documentation could be the right start.
Nice. Let me see over here. Someone's asking you guys to talk about unions and interfaces. Maybe go to give an example that is not like an Elasticsearch example like in the docs.
Is it my turn? I can take a look.
Round table.
Yeah. Unions and interfaces. That is not an Elasticsearch. So this is more of a general question, it seems, around how do you model perhaps a schema. So I'm kind of thrown on the exact use case. Unions and interfaces, they're not quite either or. So I guess what I'm asking is, can you elaborate a little bit? And I'd be more than happy to follow up with that.
So the only notes that came together with this question is that these are the only two things that are holding this person back from switching to AWS Amplify from Firebase.
Okay. So AppSync supports, from a GraphQL perspective, AppSync supports interfaces as part of your schema. And then from a TypeScript perspective, you're absolutely free to use unions and interfaces. There's not a limitation there. So I would say like it sounds like you've encountered some kind of roadblock, and if you could just kind of give a short little description or follow up into what the issue was that you faced, I could definitely take a look at that.
Nice. Question about the hackathon, and to you guys, if you guys know the answer for this. Um, can we use any other tech stack, other or together with the AWS Amplify stack for the hackathon?
Yeah. We can use any other tech stack in conjunction with AWS Amplify, but AWS Amplify would be something that would be required. As long as you meet the main rules and guidelines, you can use any other tech stack that is in conjunction with it.
Perfect. Let me see if we have any other questions.
For the person that asked on how to get started with AWS, I did reply in YouTube. I have a link on my channel that's a video that walks you through how to set up your AWS account, and then it also links to another video I have, not to self-plug,
Nice.
but it's like how do you set up your AWS account like securely and with best practices in mind. I don't think that the link is going to show through on like coming through Restream, but
Oh, I see.
if you're on the YouTube account where this is being streamed, you can see the link to the video there.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing the link.
For sure.
Come on, guys. If you want to have any other questions answered, this is the time. Send it up.
And if anyone does have questions like after the fact, you're like, what were they talking about on this specifically? Like, we're everywhere. I mean, you can see us on Twitter. We have an Amplified Discord. We have the Hashnode Discord. So if you do have follow-ups, feel free to reach out to any of us.
Yeah, and for the union and interfaces questions too, right? That would be a good place to repost your questions so that we could also get more feedback in terms of what features you would like to see in the future, and take that to our product and engineering teams, and then see where we stand.
Any suggestions for new aspiring developers?
Build.
Participate in this
Yeah.
hackathon.
Now go build. I wanted to share a quick story about myself. I was never a developer in the start of my career. I was super impressed in the ease of building stuff in what Amplify provided internally for me. I may be sounding biased towards AWS services, but then the ease of building that was provided by Amplify made me get started with an internal tool that I could build and show off. Unfortunately, I didn't have the $12,000 price that I got for it, but I did get the experience and programming abilities for me to succeed in building with Amplify. So the only suggestion would be is to experiment, try, and build.
That's awesome.
I actually have a similar story where I was, I'm self-taught for those of you that didn't catch my initial slide, but I became a full stack developer in the cloud after I was a UX engineer for a company. And it was only through Amplify. When it first started, I was an early adopter in it that I ended up working here. And it was similar to R&D, which is, it just made things very simple for me to get started and build out applications. I've always been a builder, but the back end was this scary place where I didn't want to touch. And Amplify really made it easy for me and ended up working here.
That's awesome. And I think for any person who's heavily involved with the UI, UX, or front end, the back end is always like the scariest part. So seeing you guys facilitating that and making it easy for everyone to use it, it's just awesome. I love it. Well, don't see any other questions here. So as you guys mentioned, if you guys have any other questions after this workshop, please send it up in our Discord. Okay, we have one more. How can we use the prediction library on Amplify to give recommendations based on interests? Any suggestions?
So The predictions library is a part of the Amplify JavaScript library. And in order to add the prediction category, you would start off with the CLI by using the Amplify add predictions. And this example workflow is actually provided in the documentation that we just shared, and we could throw in a link as well. If you are planning to use recommendations based on interest, you would probably have to integrate with some other services in the backend, along with the prediction library like Amazon Personalize or Amazon Recognition in order to solve for the use case.
Yeah, and I just did a video on using predictions to do text to speech. So that's like a good use case of it, or speech to text. And it's fairly straightforward to add in. You just have to add in a new configuration, and then just feed in some text, and it works pretty well. But the predictions library is something often we don't see a ton of people doing things on, and it's really powerful. So you can translate text from one language to another, convert text to speech, entity recognition, interpretation of text, transcribing text. But yeah, it's pretty powerful. And then you can do, like with Amazon Recognition, you can even do even more like sentiment analysis and things like that too.
Awesome. Someone wants to know a little bit more about the judging criteria. So let me share my screen quickly. And for the judging criteria, we actually have a segment for rules and guidelines where your application must be either full stack for web, mobile, or cross-platform. You need to integrate AWS Amplify for authentication, the GraphQL API, and if you prefer the AWS CDK, then you need to deploy the above components and then use the AWS CDK, and also use the libraries to integrate in your front end. And there are two ways that you can get even more bonus points to leverage in your application. So for web apps, you need to either use AWS Studio to create the front end components, or the in-app messaging or storage component in your application. Or in the second way to get more bonus points for mobile or cross platforms, you need to either use storage or analytics or predictions in your applications. So the main component is this 2 points here for the rules and guidelines, and this section is only for ways to get even more points to be analyzed when participating. Okay. Are there any other questions here? All right. So be closing it off. And thank you guys for sharing a super insightful session with us today. It was really, really cool to see all the projects and everything that you can build with AWS Amplify. And it's time for you guys that have been watching us to leverage all the AWS Amplify power and bring your ideas to life. I really encourage you guys, if you haven't registered, to register for the hackathon, give your best, participate. And we are really looking forward to see all the submissions and also apps that you guys are going to build. And thank you guys, Arundeep, Eric, Michael, for joining us, and see you all in the hackathon.
Thanks much, Danny. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Danny.